privacy policy or terms of service policy for your services. Just so that you lay out exactly how you're going to use people's information. So I've included a bunch of different categories of what constitutes identity on the web. The reason I think this is really interesting ultimately is because most services ask for something like an email address or a phone number or to establish who you are. It's some kind of an external identifier. And basically, it's a proxy for something like a social security number, which you can't ask for. but in fact, when services are signing you up and asking for an email address or what have you, it's in order to sort of establish something that's permanent and unique about you. Yeah, actually, I looked myself up on the People website today in preparation for the class and saw that my birth date was actually online, and I didn't realize that was actually publicly accessible information, or at least online accessible information. So it's really interesting to see how more and more information about people is just becoming available in an open way. All right. Another topic about mashups that I think is really important is basically exchanging information between different pieces of code. And I don't know how much you guys have used XML, but I thought I'd just make sure to present JSON, which is JavaScript object notation, and say that it's as rich as XML in terms of what it can represent. And in fact, you can represent executable code in it, which does raise some security issues in browsers. But it is very concise. It's very human readable. And so I highly recommend learning that notation, because it's also very convenient for debugging. It's much easier to sort of track down a bug in communicating processes when it's human readable and it's not as verbose as XML is. Yeah. Cool. And then, for the real world example, I thought Google Maps was probably the clearest one to give. And one of the reasons it's fun is that it's sort of really where modern mashups started on the web. And I think it was something like crime scene data that got mapped onto Google Maps first, or something like that. And the people who did it basically reverse engineered the JavaScript in order to figure out how to display their the push pins onto the maps. And so it was a very clever thing. And what was really interesting was that Google embraced it rather than trying to shut it down. And I think that was something that was very powerful, because it instantly created a whole new category of uses for the Google Maps that hadn't existed before, and tremendously expanded the reach of Google Maps throughout the web. So you can learn a few things from this. One is that sometimes openness really does make a big difference. It helps for getting your service used by others. And another great example of that is Twitter, because Twitter's API is, I think, one of the big things that made hackers really interested in Twitter and allowed it to grow so quickly early on. And you can see a lot of smaller companies embracing, mashup APIs, and I'll talk about a few of those coming up. So it's definitely an incredible way to let other businesses and other people know about what you're doing and let them experiment with what you're doing and basically grow your user base and increase the likelihood that your service is going to really settle into its niche. So, as far as Google Maps are concerned, I think that their popularity is kind of going to hold unless some incredible quantum leap in map APIs happens that allows you to do something that Google is caught completely unawares of. But I don't see that happening in the near future. And so I thought that since we're talking about the Maps API, that I'd talk just a little bit more about visualization, because it seems to be an area where mashups are very powerful. And so one of those is in the concept of distributed pattern matching. It turns out that there's so many ways to combine data and look at data that it's basically impossible for any one person to sort of capture all of the different patterns that are available. So by making your visualizations publicly accessible and configurable, you actually increase the likelihood that interesting results are going to be discovered as a result.